Hello again. Right, so I'm going to read the second chapter of While the Wells Came. I'm going to have to split the chapter in two because it's quite big for filming. So here we go. So, chapter 2 is called Island of Ghosts. Tea when I was a child was fish. Fish and potatoes. And that evening it was mullet, a great pink fish that stared up at me with glazed eyes from the platter. I had no appetite for it. All I could think of were those two letters in the sand on Rushy Bay. I had to know one way or the other. I had to be sure it was the Birdman. I forced myself to eat the fish, for I knew Mother and Father would suspect something if I did not, for mullet was known to be my favourite fish. We ate in silence, busying ourselves over the meal, so that I had the whole meal to work out how best to ask them about the initials in the sand without incriminating myself. Saw the Birdman today, I said, as casually as I could. I hope you kept your distance, said Father, pushing his plate away. With young Daniel Pender, were you again? Always with him, aren't you? And it was true, I suppose. Daniel Pender and Gracie Jenkins were a pair, inseparable. We always had been. He lived just over the way from our front gate at Veronica Farm. Whatever we did together. Father went on. Proper young scallywag, his dad said he is, and I can believe it. You be sure he doesn't lead you into any trouble, my girl? Always looks like a big puppy. That one with his arms and legs too big for the rest of him. His hair's always stood up on end, just like he got out of bed. Proper scallywag he looks. Looks aren't everything, Mother said quietly. And then she smiled and added, They can't be, can they? Else, how would I have ever come to pick you? My beard, perhaps, Clemmy, Father laughed, and he stroked his beard and smoothed his moustache. He always called her Clemmy when he was happy. It was Clem when he was angry. You leave Daniel be, said Mother. He's a clever boy, clever with his hands. You've seen those boats he makes. I help him, I insisted. I paint them and I make the sails. Been sailing them all day, I suppose, said Father. Out by the pool, were you? That where you saw the Birdman? Yes, Father, I said, and then, about the Birdman, Father. Everyone just calls him the Birdman, but he must have a real name like other people, mustn't he? Woodcock, said his father, sitting back in his chair and undoing a notch in his belt as he always did after a meal. Woodcock. That's what his mother was called anyway. You can see for yourself, if you like. She's buried down in the churchyard somewhere. Last one to leave Samson, they say. Her and the boy. Starving they were by all accounts. Anyway, they came over to Briar and built that cottage up there on Heathy Hill away from everyone else. The old woman died a few years after I was born. Must have been dead, 30 years or more now. The Birdman's lived on his own up there ever since, but you hear all sorts of things about his old mother. There's some will tell you she was a witch, and some will say she was just plain mad. Perhaps she was both, I don't know. Same with the Birdman. I don't know whether he's just mad or evil with it. Either way, it's best to keep away from him. There's things I could tell you. Don't go frightening her now with your stories, Mother said. Anyway, it's only rumours and tittle-tattle. I don't believe half of it. If anything goes wrong on this island, they blame it on the Birdman. Lobsters aren't there to be caught, it's his fault. Blight in the potatoes, it's his fault. Anyone catches the fever, it's his fault. Dog goes missing, they say he's eaten it. Load of old nonsense. It's just a bit simple, bit mad perhaps, that's all. Simple, my aunt, said Father, getting up and going over to his chair by the stove. And what's more, it's not all tittle-tattle, Clemmy, not all of it, and you know it's not. There's no need to tell her any more, said Mother. As long as she doesn't go anywhere near him. As long as she keeps off Samson, that's all that matters. Don't you go filling her head with all those stories. But they aren't stories, are they, Clemmy? Remember what happened to Charlie Webber? Charlie Webber? Who's he? I asked. Never you mind about Charlie Webber, Mother said, and spoke firmly to Father. That's enough. You'll only frighten her. But Father ignored her. He leaned forwards in his chair, stuffing his pipe with tobacco. Charlie Webber was my best friend when I was a boy, Gracie. Got into all sorts of scrapes together. Charlie and me. Nothing we wouldn't tell each other, and Charlie wouldn't ever have lied to me, not in a million years. It wasn't like that, was he, Clemmy? But Mother wouldn't answer him. She walked away and busied herself at the sink. His voice dropped to a whisper now, almost as if he was afraid of being overheard. There's always been strange stories about Samson Island, Gracie. Of course, people only half believed them, but they've always steered clear of Samson all the same, just in case. But it was all on account of the Birdman and his mother that Samson became a place nobody dared to go near. They were the ones who put it about that there was a curse on the place. They were always warning people to keep off, and so we did. They told everybody it was an island of ghosts, that whoever set foot on the place would bring terrible curse of Samson down on his family. No one quite believed all about ghosts and curses, but just the same, everybody kept well clear of the place, everyone except Charlie. Father lifted up his pipe and sat back in his chair, which creaked underneath him as it always did whenever he moved. I never went over there, but Charlie did. It was a day I'll never forget. Never. Never. Low tide, no water to speak of between Briar and Samson. You could walk across. It was my idea and not one I'm proud of, Gracie, I can tell you. It was me that dared Charlie Webber. I dared him to walk over to Samson. We were always daring each other to do silly things. That's just how we were. And Charlie Webber could never resist a dare. I stood on top of Samson Hill and I watched him running over the sands towards Samson, leaping the pools. It took him about 10 minutes, I suppose, and there he was, jumping up and down on the beach, waving and shouting to me, when suddenly this man in a black sou'wester appeared out of the dunes behind him, came from nowhere. He began screaming at Charlie like some mad fiend, and Charlie ran and ran and ran. He ran like a hare all the way back across the sand, stumbling and splashing through the shallows. By the time he reached me, he was white with fear, Gracie, white with it, I tell you. But that's not all of it. That very same night, Charlie Webber's house was burnt to the ground. It's true, Gracie. Everyone managed to get out alive, but they never did find out what caused the fire. But Charlie knew all right, and I knew. Next day, Charlie went down with scarlet fever. I caught it after him, and then near enough every child on the island got it. Auntie Mildred, you know Daniel's Auntie Mildred, she was just a baby at the time and she nearly died of it. Did Charlie Webber die of it, I asked. Now that's enough, said Mother sharply. You've said enough. Clem, said Father, she's 10 years old and she's not a baby anymore. She's old enough to hear the rest of it. He lit his pipe again, drawing on it deeply several times before he shook out the match. No, Gracie, Charlie didn't die, but he had to leave the island. His family was ruined, couldn't afford to rebuild the house, but before Charlie left for good, he told me something I'll never forget. The day after the fire, Charlie was sitting on the quay when he felt somebody behind him. He looked around, and there was the Birdman. There was nowhere for Charlie to run. He'd come, he said, to say sorry to Charlie, to explain to him that it wasn't his fault. There was nothing he could do once Charlie had set foot on Samson. He told Charlie that there was a curse on the island and the ghosts of the dead haunted the place and could not rest, not until the guilt of Samson had been redeemed, whatever that meant. And when Charlie asked why there was a curse on Samson, why the ghosts could not rest, this is what he told him. He was a little boy when it happened, younger than Charlie, he said. The people of Samson woke up one morning to find a ship run aground on the sandbank off the island. Like a ghost ship it was on a flat, calm sea. No fog, no winds, no reason for it to be there at all. They rowed out and hailed it, but nobody answered, so they clambered on board. There was no one there. The ship was deserted. Well, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth, do you? Every man on Samson, 16 of them there were in all, he said, every one of them was on that ship when it was refloated at high tide. They sailed it off to Penzance to claim the salvage money, but they never got there. The ship foundered on Wolf Rock off Land's End, went down in broad daylight. Gentle breeze, no fog, and every man was lost, every man drowned. The Birdman's own father went down on that ship, Gracie. It's a horrible story, said Mother, horrible. Every time I hear it, it makes me shiver. True nonetheless, Clemmy, Father said, and that wasn't the last of it. It seems things went from bad to worse on Samson after that. With no men left to go fishing or work up on the fields, the women and children soon began to go hungry. All they had to eat was limpets. The Birdman told Charlie they even had to eat the dogs. It's true, Gracie, that's what Charlie told me. Then with the hunger came the fever, and the old folk and the babies began to die. So they left. One by one, the families left the island until the Birdman and his mother were alone on Samson. Father drawed his pipe again and found it had gone out. His pipe was always going out. And I believe every word Charlie told me, Gracie. I don't pretend to understand the whys and wherefores, and I'll tell you straight, I don't know if it's him that's cursed or Samson. All I know is it's better to keep away from him. From both of them, that's for sure. So you keep well clear of him, hear me now? I sat silent for some time, lost in Father's story, my head full of questions. So he could put spells and curses on people like they say he can? I asked. Maybe, said Father, tapping his pipe out on the side of the stove. and I shivered as I thought of how close we'd been to his cottage that day, and how he must have been watching us on Rushy Bay. Then there were those letters in the sand. Perhaps they were initials, but perhaps they were part of some spell. I wanted to be sure. What about his first name, Father? Do you know his first name? But immediately I regretted it, for I felt Mother looking at me. I was being over-inquisitive, too interested, and she was suspicious. Why all these sudden questions about the Birdman, Gracie? She asked. You've never shown any interest in him before. Just saw him today, like I said, just wondering, that's all, Daniel and me, just wondering about him. Mother came over and stood in front of me. She took my chin in her hand and pulled it up so that I had to look her in the eyes. She always did this when she thought I'd been up to some mischief and she wanted to get the truth out of me. You haven't been speaking to him, have you, Gracie? You haven't been over Heathy Hill, have you? You know you're not supposed to go there, don't you? No, Mother, of course I haven't. Honest, I haven't. It was just as well I didn't have to lie, for Mother would have known. She looked down at me out of tired, kind eyes, a knowing smile on her lips, so knowing that I had to look away. You leave him to his birds, Gracie, Father said. You keep well away, like I said. Promise me now. You be a good girl and stay away. I promise, I said. I'll stay away. And so I did. For a day or so, at least. And we'll read the rest of the chapter another time.